When Ben discovers his wife Laura's affair, his world collapses. Fueled by heartbreak and betrayal, he meticulously plots a calculated revenge, stripping her of the comforts she once took for granted. But as his plan unfolds, Ben learns that Laura's deception hides deeper scars than he imagined. What begins as a quest for justice spirals into a tragic reckoning, forcing Ben to confront the cost of vengeance, the fragility of love, and the haunting question, is forgiveness worth finding when it comes too late? In this gripping tale of betrayal and redemption, the line between victim and villain blurs, leading to a devastating conclusion that will linger long after the final page. Laura kissed me lightly on the cheek, a fleeting gesture I'd grown used to over the years. "Don't wait up," she said with a practiced smile. Her perfume lingered, a crisp, floral scent that once made me feel lucky just to hold her close. Now it seemed like a shield, hiding something darker beneath. It was a typical Friday evening, or so I thought. Our two kids were upstairs, lost in their own worlds of video games and late homework, while I settled into the living room. I wasn't one to pry, trust was the cornerstone of our 15-year marriage. Or at least, it had been. The unease began as a whisper in the back of my mind. There was something in the way she smiled that didn't reach her eyes, the faint edge of excitement in her voice that didn't match her words. I shrugged it off. Maybe I was being paranoid. Or maybe I wasn't. As the hours stretched on, the house grew quiet. I moved to my office, half-heartedly scrolling through emails. My mind wandered, replaying the last few months in vivid flashes, her late-night, work calls, the sudden interest in Friday evening, girls' nights, and the spark in her eyes that I hadn't been the cause of in years. I was startled by the ping of a notification on my phone. It was from the smart lock system I'd installed last year, a gadget Laura had teased me about, calling it overkill. The timestamp caught my eye, the lock had disengaged hours earlier than she was supposed to be home. My pulse quickened. The kids were home, the doors locked. Why would she need to come back so early? My curiosity flared, pulling me from my chair and toward the monitor in the hallway. A quick scan of the log revealed the same oddity on previous Fridays. I stared at the data, the unease blooming into something sharper. For 2 months, she'd been unlocking the door at strange hours on her supposed nights out. My chest tightened as the pieces clicked together. I wasn't a man prone to suspicion, but this was different. Instead of confronting her, I chose to wait. Confrontation would only give her time to lie. I needed proof. The next week, I prepared carefully. I told Laura I had a late-night meeting with a client and wouldn't be home until well past midnight. She seemed unusually cheerful as I left, humming a song under her breath. That hum, a small detail, stayed with me all evening. When she left the house, I stayed behind, watching from the upstairs window as she climbed into her car and drove off. With the kids asleep, I slipped into the living room and set up a small hidden camera I'd purchased online. It was the size of a button, unobtrusive, and easily overlooked. The next morning, I retrieved the footage. My hands trembled as I plugged the camera into my laptop, scrolling through hours of empty living room scenes. Then, there it was. Laura's car pulled into the driveway. The clock on the screen read 9:15 p.m., hours before her usual return. A man I didn't recognize stepped into the frame, his silhouette tall and confident. My stomach lurched. She let him in with a familiarity that twisted the knife in my gut. They moved to the couch, their bodies tangled together in ways that left no room for doubt. I slammed the laptop shut, bile rising in my throat. Every instinct screamed at me to confront her, to demand answers, but another part of me knew it was too soon. I needed more than just a few grainy images. I needed a plan. I spent the next week quietly collecting evidence. Each night, I replayed the footage, memorizing every damning detail. I called in favors, hiring a private investigator to dig into the man's life. His name was Adam, a mid-level contractor with a penchant for cutting corners and a history of failed business ventures. He was everything I wasn't: reckless, impulsive, and desperate. The PI's report painted a clear picture. Adam was neck-deep in debt, juggling overdue loans and unpaid bills. He wasn't just after my wife, he was after my life, the stability and comfort I'd worked so hard to build. The irony was bitter. Laura had always been my anchor, the one who kept me grounded through the chaos of my work. Now, she was the storm threatening to destroy it all. By the time Friday rolled around again, I was ready. I kissed Laura goodbye, the way I always did, and watched her drive off with the same practiced cheerfulness she'd shown the week before. Only this time, I wasn't staying home. I followed her car from a safe distance, my hands gripping the wheel tightly. She led me across town, past the familiar streets of our suburb and into the dimly lit parking lot of a cheap motel. My chest tightened as I watched her step out of the car and greet Adam with a smile that had once belonged to me. They disappeared into one of the rooms, the door closing behind them with a finality that left me breathless. I sat there for what felt like hours, my mind racing. Every scenario played out in my head, barging in, demanding answers, dragging her home by force. But no, that wasn't who I was. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I drove home, the images burned into my mind, and sat in the silence of the living room. The kids were upstairs, oblivious to the chaos unraveling beneath their feet. I poured myself a drink, the glass shaking in my hand, and stared into the darkness. That night, I made a promise to myself. This wasn't going to be the end of me. Laura thought she had the upper hand, but she had no idea what she'd unleashed. This was far from over. The day after I followed Laura to the motel was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of stillness that feels like the air just before a storm. Laura returned in the early hours, slipping into bed without a word. Her perfume lingered, a taunting reminder of her betrayal. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her silhouette beside me no longer familiar. The next morning, she carried on as though nothing had happened. Pancakes for the kids. Her usual phone calls and laughter that once filled our home with warmth now felt like daggers. I let her obliviousness fuel me. She had no idea I was watching every move. That was my edge. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Confrontation meant giving her the chance to manipulate the story, to twist her lies into something resembling the truth. I needed her to believe I was still the same trusting, clueless husband she had taken for granted. I buried myself in the routine of daily life, but my mind was in overdrive. The PI's report had given me enough to confirm Adam was nothing but trouble. His debts, his desperation, it all painted the picture of a man who was using Laura as much as she was using him. The thought disgusted me. That evening, I slipped out of the house and made my way to Adam's listed address. It was a dingy apartment complex on the far side of town. The building reeked of decay, both physical and moral. I waited in my car, watching the comings and goings, memorizing faces, looking for Adam. When he finally appeared, carrying a stack of takeout boxes and a bottle of cheap whiskey, I made my move. "Adam," I called out, stepping from the shadows. He froze, his eyes narrowing as he registered my face. "Who the hell are you?" he asked, his tone defensive, his posture ready for a fight. "Just a guy with a warning," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. "Stay away from my wife." He snorted, an arrogant smirk playing on his lips. "Your wife? Laura? She's not exactly your property, buddy." I took a step closer, my voice dropping. "You don't know who you're messing with, Adam. Walk away now, and I might forget your name." "Or what?" he sneered. "You'll call the cops." "Go ahead." "She came to me, man. You think I'm scared of some suburban dad?" I stared at him, the smirk on his face twisting the knife deeper. But I kept my composure. "You're not scared now," I said, leaning in, "but you should be. Because I know everything about you. Your debts, your scams, your little failed ventures. I could ruin you without even breaking a sweat. His expression faltered, the bravado fading. I saw it, the flicker of fear in his eyes. But before he could respond, I turned and walked away, leaving him with the weight of my words. That encounter wasn't about solving the problem, it was about planting a seed of doubt. I wanted Adam to feel uneasy, to realize that he wasn't just playing with Laura, he was playing with me. And I don't lose. The next phase of my plan involved Laura. I needed her to slip up, to expose herself in a way that left no room for denial. So I played the role of the loving husband, attentive and doting. I cooked her favorite meals, planned family outings, and made sure she couldn't accuse me of neglect. The better I treated her, the guiltier she seemed. She started to avoid me, spending more time at work or with her friends. I let her. Every lie she told was another nail in the coffin of our marriage. 2 weeks later, I got my break. Laura left her laptop open in the living room, her browser tabs still active. One of them was an email exchange with Adam. My pulse quickened as I scanned the messages. They were planning another rendezvous, this time at a cabin upstate. The emails were explicit, filled with promises of passion and escape. I took screenshots of everything, saving them to a flash drive. It was the proof I needed, not just for myself but for the courts. Divorce wasn't just about ending the relationship, it was about winning. And with Laura's lies and infidelity on record, I was going to win everything. The night before their planned getaway, I set my final trap. Over dinner, I was the picture of warmth and affection, listening to Laura talk about her upcoming conference with a polite smile. She didn't suspect a thing. As she kissed me goodbye the next morning, I smiled back, masking the storm brewing beneath the surface. "Have a great trip," I said. She hesitated for a moment, guilt flashing in her eyes, but she quickly recovered and walked out the door. I didn't follow her this time. I didn't need to. Instead, I made a few phone calls. The private investigator. My lawyer. A locksmith. By the time Laura and Adam returned from their little getaway, they'd find the locks changed, their accounts frozen, and their dirty laundry exposed for everyone to see. I sat in the living room that evening, sipping a glass of whiskey, savoring the quiet. This was the calm before the real storm. Laura thought she had won. She thought I was still the same man she could manipulate. But tomorrow, she'd realize just how wrong she was. The morning Laura returned from her conference, I was ready. The locks had been changed, the accounts frozen, and every piece of damning evidence meticulously prepared. I heard her car pull into the driveway, her footsteps hesitant as she approached the front door. When the key didn't turn, she knocked. I took my time opening the door. When I finally did, her face was a mix of confusion and frustration. "Ben, what's going on? Why are the locks changed?" I stepped aside, letting her see the packed suitcases sitting in the foyer. "Your things," I said coldly. "You'll find them all here. The rest is already in storage." Her mouth opened, then closed. She glanced at the bags and back to me. "What is this? Why are you acting like this?" I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Because I'm done, Laura. I'm done playing the fool while you sneak off to motels and cabins with Adam." Her face went pale, the blood draining so quickly I thought she might faint. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. "You're being ridiculous." I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Don't insult my intelligence, Laura. I have proof. Emails. Videos. Pictures. Do you really want me to go into detail?" Her hand flew to her mouth, and for a moment, she looked genuinely panicked. But then, as if summoning some inner reserve, she straightened. "I can explain." "Save it," I said, cutting her off. "Explain it to the divorce lawyer. You'll be hearing from mine soon. I didn't let her in. Whatever story she had concocted, whatever crocodile tears she planned to shed, I refused to listen. She tried calling me later that evening, her messages oscillating between anger and desperation. One moment she was accusing me of overreacting, the next, she was begging for another chance. I ignored every call. The kids, thankfully, were staying with my parents for the weekend. I didn't want them witnessing the fallout. They didn't need to see their mother unravel or their father wielding the truth like a blade. By Monday, Laura's desperation had reached its peak. She showed up at my office unannounced, catching me off guard as I was finishing a meeting. "Ben, please," she said, her voice cracking. She looked haggard, her makeup smudged and her usually perfect hair a mess. "Can we talk? Just for a few minutes." I waved my assistant off and closed the door behind her. "What do you want, Laura?" I asked, keeping my tone icy. "Please don't do this," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I made a mistake, a horrible, stupid mistake. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling, talk to someone, anything you want." I let her words hang in the air for a moment before responding. "Do you think this is just about you cheating on me?" I asked, my voice low. "This is about trust. Respect. You didn't just betray me, you destroyed our family." "I was lonely," she blurted. "You were so busy with work, the kids, everything. I felt invisible. And your solution was to crawl into bed with Adam?" I shot back. "Do you have any idea how pathetic that sounds?" She flinched, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. But then I remembered the emails, the laughter they shared at my expense, the nights I stayed home with the kids while she played out her fantasies. "Laura," I said, my tone softening slightly. "You made your choices. Now you'll live with the consequences." The divorce proceedings began quickly. My lawyer, armed with the evidence I had gathered, ensured that Laura was left with little leverage. The house, the custody of the kids, the bulk of our savings, it all came to me. Laura's lawyer tried to paint her as a woman driven to infidelity by neglect, a victim of a cold and distant husband. But the evidence was damning. Emails detailing her affair. Footage of her and Adam together. Financial records proving she'd spent money from our joint accounts on their little escapades. The judge didn't buy her sob story. When the ruling came down, Laura was left with a fraction of what she had hoped for. As we left the courthouse, she approached me one last time. "Ben," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope one day you can find it in your heart to let go of the anger." I stared at her, the woman I had loved, the mother of my children, now a stranger. "I'm not angry, Laura," I said quietly. "I'm just done." That night, I sat in the living room, surrounded by the quiet I had come to appreciate. The kids were asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware of the full extent of what had happened. The house felt lighter without Laura's presence, as though her lies had weighed it down. I raised a glass of whiskey to the empty room, a silent toast to the man I used to be and the one I had become. The pain was still there, sharp and unyielding, but beneath it was a sense of freedom. Laura thought she had taken everything from me, but in truth, she had given me something far more valuable, a fresh start. And I intended to make the most of it. It had been 6 months since the divorce was finalized. Life had settled into a new kind of normal. The kids adjusted surprisingly well to the new arrangement, though I could see the confusion and hurt in their eyes whenever Laura's name came up. I didn't talk about her much, there wasn't much to say. I had moved on. Or at least, I thought I had. On a quiet Saturday morning, I was working on the car in the garage when my phone buzzed on the workbench. It was a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I wouldn't have answered, but something made me pause. "Hello? Mr. Parker?" The voice on the other end was professional, clinical. This is Dr. Stein from Memorial Hospital. I'm calling about your ex-wife, Laura. My grip on the phone tightened. What about her? She was admitted earlier today. There was an accident. I'm afraid her condition is critical. She's asking for you. The words hit me like a hammer. Laura. Critical condition. My mind raced with questions, but all I could manage was a week, I'll be there. The hospital smelled of antiseptic and desperation. I hated it. A nurse led me to a private room, where Laura lay motionless, her once vibrant face pale and bruised. Tubes and monitors surrounded her, their rhythmic beeping a cruel reminder of the fragility of life. Her eyes fluttered open as I entered, and for a moment, she looked at me the way she used to, back when things were good. Ben, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I pulled up a chair, unsure of what to say. What happened, Laura? She smiled weakly. It doesn't matter. I needed to see you. The nurse had mentioned an accident, but Laura's frailty told a deeper story. Her arms bore faint marks I hadn't noticed before. Her once glossy hair was thin and brittle. She looked like someone who had been fighting a losing battle. I wanted to say I'm sorry, she continued, tears pooling in her eyes. Not just for the affair, but for everything. I ruined us, Ben. I ruined you. I shook my head, my throat tightening. You didn't ruin me. You hurt me, yes. But I've moved on. The kids and I are okay. A tear slipped down her cheek. I know. I'm glad. I just wish. I wish I had been stronger. There was so much I wanted to ask, so much I wanted to say. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I reached for her hand, the first time I'd touched her in what felt like a lifetime. She squeezed it gently, her strength barely there. Promise me, she whispered, that you'll take care of Emma and Jake. Make sure they know how much I love them. I nodded, my chest aching. I promise. Her breathing grew shallow, the monitors around her beeping erratically. Panic set in, and I looked around for a nurse, but Laura's grip on my hand tightened. Stay, she whispered. Please. I stayed. The funeral was small, just family and close friends. The kids cried, their grief raw and unfiltered. I held them close, trying to be the strong one, but inside I was crumbling. Despite everything she had done, Laura was their mother. And a part of me still mourned the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. In the days that followed, I pieced together the details of her last months. After the divorce, her life spiraled out of control. Adam had left her almost immediately, taking what little money she had. Her drinking, something I hadn't even known was a problem, had worsened. The accident that landed her in the hospital was the result of her passing out behind the wheel. But the marks on her arms, the hollow look in her eyes, that was something else entirely. Laura had been sick, battling an illness she'd kept hidden from everyone. By the time she sought help, it was too late. One evening, as I sorted through the boxes of her things, I found a letter addressed to me. The handwriting was shaky, the envelope crumpled. With trembling hands, I opened it. Ben. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get the chance to tell you everything I wanted to. First, I'm sorry. For all of it. For betraying you, for hurting the kids, for being weak when I should have been strong. I wasn't brave enough to face the truth. About my illness. About my mistakes. About how much I still loved you, even when I didn't deserve to. You didn't just deserve better, you were better. Better than me. Better than I could ever be. Take care of the kids. Tell them I love them more than anything. And Ben. Please don't hate me. I've hated myself enough for both of us. Laura. I sat there for hours, the letter crumpled in my hands. The anger I had held onto for so long, the bitterness that had fueled me, dissolved into a hollow ache. She was gone. And no amount of revenge or justice could bring her back. In the end, I realized the saddest truth of all: forgiveness doesn't come when you're ready to give it. It comes when it's too late.